Expert Insights hosted by the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka. Today we have the company of Dr. Vivek Dehejia, a resident senior fellow in political economy at the IDFC Institute and an associate professor of economics at the Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. Dr. Dehejia will be discussing the ease of doing business in a federal polity in the context of India. Dr. Dehejia, welcome to the Institute of Policy Studies. We were discussing how in India's context the ease of doing business is being improved on a federal polity, on a state level, and not just the national level. What factors are crucial to go beyond the most central forms of national policy making to improve the ease of doing business?
Thank you for that question, and it's a great pleasure to be here at the IPS. You see, our sense in India, or at least my sense, and the impetus behind this project, which is a partnership between the IDFC Institute, which is a Mumbai-based think tank, and the Niti Aayog, which is part of the government of India, essentially the think tank to the government of India, is that in a very large, complex federal country, federal polity like India, that yes, the center has to drive reform, the reform agenda, but increasingly the states have to do much more of the heavy lifting. And so this is the first attempt really to systematically at a granular level get a sense of what are the obstacles on the ground, the horizontal obstacles that affect all firms in the ease of doing business in almost all 29 states and 7 union territories. We're covering a large sample of 3,000 plus enterprises, and this will give us a sense perhaps of what are the challenges at the local level in pushing the reforms agenda and in fixing a doing business climate that needs to be improved in some cases.
In terms of reforming what is needed to ease the doing business environment, how does the more disaggregated level of this study help in that aspect?
It helps in a number of ways, because when one talks about the doing business climate, we all think of the famous World Bank annual report, which ranks countries from 1 to 189. But the reality is that the nature of that report is such that they can really only look at the 1 or 2 largest commercial centers in each of the countries that they study. So in a country with 100 million population and up, which includes India of course, they're looking really only at Mumbai and Delhi. Now, in a large country like India, with enormous regional diversity, with governments at the state level with different policies, you really cannot infer much about the ease of doing business in Cochin, in the south, in Bhubaneswar, in the east, and so on, the regions of the Srinagar in the north, regions of the country. So the impetus really is we have to do a granular level study which goes beyond just Mumbai and Delhi, because the realities on the ground could be very different in the many regions of the country.
As you may well know, the Sri Lankan policy-making process is very different to India's, particularly in terms of the decentralization of power. What can Sri Lanka learn from the study you are currently carrying out now in India in terms of how to replicate that sort of reform process, or in how to replicate that sort of study in Sri Lanka?
I mean, again, every political economy or every nation has its own political economy dynamic, and of course it's very different in Sri Lanka, which has a different geography, a different political setup. But I would say this, that irrespective of who the decision maker is, whether it's the central government, whether it's your district governments, perhaps at some point there might be a move towards greater decentralization of power, devolution of power and finance, be that as it may, whichever is the person or the entity making the decision, I think it'll be extremely helpful to have this disaggregated local sense of what are the constraints, again the horizontal constraints affecting all enterprises, but I would say especially micro, small and medium in a place like Sri Lanka, that any policymaker would need to be concerned about. And this is something that could inform policy making, could start a conversation going about what needs to change, what are some key steps we would have to take, and it widens it beyond what tends to happen in smaller economies or small and medium-sized economies. It becomes very much focused around the major commercial centers. So In Sri Lanka, it's Colombo and the Western Province. Of course, it's 40% of your GDP, so what happens here is important. But there's 60% going on out there in other provinces, in other regions, the north, the east, and the south.
In terms of creating the necessary political economy for reform, how important is it that we go beyond these commercial points such as Colombo or the Western Province, as you say?
Well, I think it's very important because you would like to have buy-in from as many stakeholders as possible. And again, the political economy of reform is such that if you try and do difficult and painful reforms, you're going to get pushback. You're going to get people saying, look, this is for the already successful, it's for the already powerful and rich to further enrich themselves and so on. And so to get away from this narrative that it's all centered around the hub of economic and political activity, both in Sri Lanka's case, is to reach out to the diverse regions. You're a country that has come through a major civil conflict, and you've now you've moved beyond that. You have a reformist government, and I think it will be very important to try to get buy-in from as many stakeholders in all of the regions of this country, because I mean Sri Lanka, yes, it's a relatively small island economy, but you've got a lot of diversity even here in Sri Lanka.
Dr. Dehejia, thank you very much for your insights, and we wish to see you back at the Institute of Policy Studies again.
Thank you, and I would love to come back sometime soon. Thank you very much.